Right. Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to be partnering with CJ. CJ, how do you pronounce your last name?
Fearnley.
Fearnley. I am delighted to partner with CJ Fearnley. CJ, has been at comprehensivism for a long time. And so have I been doing the same. I've been doing the same thing in my own way. And I was just delighted that, our common friend Joe introduced us only about like 2-3 weeks ago, and we just hit it off. So we're doing this entire series. And I want to first tell you about what's coming up while we let, people trickle in. So we started out with why be a comprehensivist? We did a panel discussion that is available on YouTube. Then we did one on Louis Sullivan's ideas with Sherry Trasinski, an architect. That's also available on YouTube. Today, we are going to talk about humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action with CJ. On August 2nd, our entire schedule is packed till end of September. So I have now Sunday as a backup. So I've started using Sundays whenever I need to. So this Sunday, we are going to look at Louis Sullivan's idea of every problem contains and suggests its own solution at 2:30 Eastern time. Then on August 5th, I have my friend, Spencer Greenberg, who is a mathematician and entrepreneur, talking about how to optimize everything in the field of psychology and economics and behavior and every possible field. Then on August 12th, CJ will be back talking about the necessities and impossibilities of being a comprehensivist. On August 19th, we have Angela presenting on polymaths in the 21st century. On August 26th, we have Karen talking about individual and society, and she has, art education as an idea of, flying with two wings, one which is true to your own self and one which is true to society. So that's on August 26th. On September 2nd, we have Sanjay talking about neuroscience, why our habits are so powerful. Then on September 9th, we have got 4 Cardinal Greek Virtues in Visual Art and Mythology by John Roth. On September 16th, CJ will be back talking about literature and our lives, the fiction of relationships. On September 23rd, we have a special called Lightning Talks, where we are going to invite all of you to talk for 5 minutes on any topic that you're exploring. On September 30th, I'm going to be talking about the great conversation and syntopicon of Mortimer Adler. So that's what is coming up. And, if there are more, I'm opening up Sundays now. So I don't want to wait for too long. I would rather do more things fast. So that's the plan. So we are up to 42 people, so we can get started. CJ, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Shrikant, for jumping at the idea of doing this kind of a series. I think it's important. So our task tonight is to explore the toolkit of the comprehensivist. In order to aspire to comprehensivity, that is, coming to understand our worlds and its peoples more and more broadly and deeply, what possible approaches can we mobilize to make sense of it all and of each other? The comprehensivist seeks the broadest possible range of what we can know or understand. We seek the broadest possible ken. A book is just one person's curation. University courses and curricula are integrated by more people, but often cover just a piece of our accumulated knowledge. In aggregate, they are broader still. Videos can fill in many of the gaps. But my question, what is the Ken of the comprehensivist? It demands some kind of catalog. So I looked at the book, The Design Way by Harold G. Nelson and Eric Stolterman, and it inspired me. They used the phrase traditions of inquiry and action. So I took that along with, say, the great books and great ideas collections of Mortimer Adler, and wordsmithed it a little bit and come up with the solutions of inquiry and action. There's a little quote I'll share from The Design Way. They say in their book, quote, design is a natural and ancient human ability, the first tradition among many traditions of human inquiry and action. So my proposal tonight is that the Ken of the comprehensivist, the range of what we can know or understand, what is in humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action. But what is this comprehensivist toolkit, this this catalog? To reveal it, I'm going to use a quote from W.E.H. Stanner. He wrote a great essay called The Dreaming. It's about the Australian Aborigines. He was an anthropologist. Quote, it took well over half a century for Europeans to realize that behind the outward show was an inward structure of surprising complexity. It was a century before any real understanding of this structure developed. In one tribe with which I am familiar, a very representative tribe, there was about 100 invisible divisions which have to be analyzed before one can claim even a serviceable understanding of the tribe's organization. The structure is much more complex than that of an Australian village of the same size. The complexity is in the most striking contrast with the comparative simplicity which rules in the other two departments of Aboriginal life, the material culture on the one hand, and the individual or metaphysical culture on the other hand. So, end quote. From that, I infer that there are three macro-comprehensive cultural aspects to our traditions of inquiry and action. Traditions of ideas, traditions of material culture, and traditions of social structures. Anthropology gives us this tripartite division of our cultural traditions. But I think that list is incomplete. To ensure the comprehensivist depth as well as their breadth, we need to add a category for the micro unit of inquiry and action. That is the experience. Experiences which can be parsed and repackaged fluidly provide a microscope to the macroscope provided by Macro's cultural categories of traditions. So now I will submit to you as a complete catalog, we have the traditions of ideas, the traditions of material culture, including the arts and technology, traditions of social structure and experiences. These comprise the range of what we can understand. Now, from Robert Sapolsky, I learned about the dangers of categorical thinking. So whenever we organize a categorization, we should consider Sapolsky's list of the dangers of categorical thinking. First, Sapolsky warns we can miss the big picture by focusing in on boundaries. Secondly, we tend to underestimate differences when two cases happen to fall in the same category. And thirdly, we tend to overestimate differences when the cases happen to fall on opposite sides of a boundary. This first concern reminds me that there may be synergies of the whole in considering the total inventory of humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action. And the other two concerns remind me that all of our distinctions become blurry when we analyze them too pedantically. Nonetheless, of course, distinctions and categories are the essential scaffolding upon which we scope and structure our explorations. They are vitally important. So that is my offer to you on the toolkit of the comprehensivist, the collection of all humanities, the collection of all humanities traditions of inquiry and action, which we may break down into traditions of ideas, traditions of material culture, traditions of social structure, and experiences. Is that clear? You know, save your comments and takeaways for the end. We have a whole section dedicated to that. Right now, I want to clarify if anything is foggy, vague, confusing. Are you resisting or blocked by this approach to the range of what we can understand? Does it make sense? Are there any questions?
Okay, folks. So this is how we do questions here. I've been running these meetups for about 4 years with between 40 to 80 people. And what we're trying to do, we have 4 rules to make possible a really intense back and forth dialogue between these many people that have worked really well for us. Number 1, raise your hand when you want to speak. The way you do that, you can raise your hand in Zoom or you can type exclamation mark in the chat. These are 2 ways of raising your hand. Okay, so that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, keep on topic. So CJ has just specified what the topic is now for this particular round of questions. Keep to that. We will have plenty of choice, plenty of opportunity to cover a lot of other things, okay? But keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. There's a lot of people who have amazing things to say. You want to hear all of them. So please be brief. And number 4, feel free to express your opinions, disagreements as clearly as possible, as you want, but please be courteous in doing that. So those are the 4 rules. So with that, please go ahead and line up for questions. First one up is David S. David, just unmute yourself and ask a question. Go ahead.
Right. I want to look at these categories in terms of the notion that they can be comprehensive. And I think in their whole series, trying to create this whole dialogue, it's going to be helpful. You'll tell me if it's the wrong approach, to try to have clear vocabulary. To what degree can we have these conversations be clear by having some kind of clarity about the basic vocabulary? So I'm going to ask about what this means to talk about a category of ideas, for example. Does this mean in a society anyone's ideas about anything, their thoughts, their abstraction? What does it mean? Like, is civil rights one of these ideas? We're talking about the ideas in people's minds or their idea of how to be good and the structures of what good means for them. How should society be organized? And, you know, the person's ideas, or are we looking at a society's ideas? Suppose you ask, where does power or social status come from? How does fire work? We talk about every idea a person has, and I'm afraid if we don't kind of get clear, and we say any idea in somebody's mind, then we're also maybe blurring that completely with the idea of what experiences are we talking about? Because experience, your fourth category, consciousness, is ideas. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I use the word traditions of inquiry and action to indicate that there should be some continuity. But I'm blending the anthropological, and experiences can be very personal. So for your example of civil rights, I could imagine there's David's tradition of thinking about civil rights, but then there's Martin Luther King Jr.'s tradition of thinking about civil rights, John Lewis's tradition of thinking about civil rights. I think for each comprehensivist, it's going to be an individual realization of their exploration of the idea. And then in our culture, you may reference a book or a course or a particular leader or, you know, so the range of what we can understand is all of that. We can come to understand our own personal tradition of civil rights as an example, or our, and so it can be very narrow and individual, but it also can be a cultural tradition. You go to the Department of, you know, what is it, African American Studies, and they have a tradition of civil rights. And I think so I'm trying to be all inclusive by using this notion of tradition as a way to encompass all the possibilities. Is that clear enough for you, David?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess I'm taking your stated goal in the write-up, that part of this is just about understanding people in order to collaborate. What does it take to collaborate with different peoples, different groups, different cultures? Is that sort of the underground?
And we're trying to understand the world and its peoples. We're trying to get a broad perspective. So that's going to be an aggregate of special case explorations. Because, you know, you can't review all 8 billion people's lives in their totality, and you know, there's too much experience, there's too many traditions of learning, and there's the thinking society traditions, the 52 living ideas traditions, there's university, you know, I mean, it's, the aggregate is huge.
Next questions are from Joe, Zeno, and Sandy. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, CJ, thanks for presenting. And as always, I'm going to ask about a topic that I think you know pretty well. Is the, you know, how does judgment factor into this process in becoming a comprehensivist and developing a model for understandings of lives, communities, you know, civilizations? Because, you know, that's something that is personal, but on a meta level, I don't see the connection.
Yeah, well, judgment involves both a personal, but there's also community standards of knowing, community standards of values. So in one community, we might value different emphases than another. And so, as you know, that I think judgment is crucial. Not everyone does. A lot of people are anxious about the notion of judgment. So I would just say that we all have to explore this unmappable, this vast territory of the full aggregate of humanity's traditions, and whether you use randomness or some conscious criteria, you are judging which way to work through it.
Next up is Zeno, followed by Sandy. Zeno, go ahead.
Hi. So I want to kind of follow up on your use the word toolkit. And so to me that suggested like how as comprehensivists do we work? How do we proceed? Or how do we approach our topic? So my background is in the sciences. In the last 400 years in the sciences, science has been a collective enterprise. There was division of labor, specialization. There was exchange of letters early on, and then publication in primitive scientific journals, and it became peer-reviewed. So there's a whole social organization that creates that knowledge. And so I wonder whether the way you look at comprehensivism, is there going to be some kind of social structure that supports people in their effort to be comprehensivists, that may even have some kind of division of labor or some kind of exchange of letters or articles and critique, rather than the lonely warrior who tries to kind of understand it all?
Yeah. In the Collaborating for Comprehensivism website, cjfearnley.com/CFC, I argue that there isn't yet a tradition of comprehensivity, of comprehensivism. The way my take would be, if we had a tradition of comprehensivism, we're developing one in 52 Living Ideas. This series of topics is, by its historical sequence, establishing a tradition of comprehensivism. But I don't want to be so arrogant as to think it's the only one, or maybe even the best one. Maybe there can be other traditions of comprehensivity. In my thinking about human knowledge, I think it's very social, as you say with science. It coalesces around traditions, around people that we decide to value. Ibn al-Haytham's idea of systematic testing of hypotheses, of systematic testing of results, that is the tradition we're going to call science. And we coalesce a tradition around it. And we even forget for hundreds of years who started it. So, does that clarify? I mean, we can.
Okay. Let's continue. Next up is Sandy, followed by Wesley. Sandy, go ahead.
Okay, CJ, thanks for doing this. You use the phrase inquiry and action as if they go together, and as if there's a tradition of those two being together. I'm wondering if in fact they aren't separate traditions that those who are the inquirers, they're the poets and philosophers and scientists, and those who are the actors, they're engineers and entrepreneurs and sometimes
Right.
government. But the idea that they go together and that it's possible, or even though it may be desirable, is it possible for someone to be a comprehensivist in the sense that you can be engaged in both the inquiry and the action?
So I get the phrase inquiry and action, traditions of inquiry and action, from The Design Way by Harold G. Nelson and Eric Stolterman. And for those who don't know, Sandy hates that book. And I love it. And he usually comes to my meetups anyway. And we have good discussions about it. I wrote an essay. In the event description, there's a link to an essay that I wrote on this subject. And in that essay, I say, you know, I'm not sure about the metaphysics of inquiry and action. Do they go together? Don't they go together? But let's just accept it as a working hypothesis. That's one way I could answer your question. I'll go further because I want to get it on the table. I actually think that inquiry and action have to go together. To inquire without action is to daydream. Science isn't daydreaming. It's ideas that are acted upon in experiment to verify whether it works. Science without action isn't science, it's speculative philosophy. And anyone who acts, any artist who's out there in the world making things, has to have some inquiry. Am I going to use the blue or the red? Am I going to use this material or that material? You cannot act in the world without inquiring what materials, what ideas, what social structures, what experiences should I compose into this action. So I would actually suggest that, in my view, inquiry and action are intricate and intimately entwined and inseparable. We only separate them with the distinctions, inquiry and action, when Robert Sapolsky's warning about distinctions and categories applies. When we create the distinction, we create blurriness, we miss the whole. And I would submit that the whole of inquiry and action is almost always more vital than the separate pieces.
Next up is Wesley, followed by Vanessa. Wesley from Singapore requests that I ask his question. He asks, how do we differentiate between personal ideas and opinions? I don't know whether he means, distinguishing between ideas and opinions of a person, or between ideas and opinions held by a person versus ideas in general in society.
Yeah, I think that relates to Joe's question about judgment. I think the individual needs to make those judgments, and all individuals are combined in a culture. We know of no human being that was born without a mother and a father, no human being born without a family and a neighborhood. We're all inculcated into the traditions of our community, wherever they are in the world, even if it's an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon, for instance. These cultural traditions that we are thrown into at birth and in our lives impose upon us judgments about what to value and what not to value. And each individual has the choice to be a rebel or a conformist. Most of us conform most of the time, but each of us chooses a few ideas that we prize as our individuality that flesh it out.
Thank you. Next up is Vanessa. Vanessa, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, do you think it's helpful, let's say if you're having like a jam session, like a brainstorming with a bunch of people of different backgrounds, where maybe having a little humility and also being willing to show your weakness, sometimes if pride gets in the way, you may be afraid of making a mistake, so you may not state something that you're thinking. And just real quick, a comment about Sandy. I think the inquiry in action is sometimes you implement that when you're doing a plan, like hiking in the woods. Maybe you've been hiking before, but okay, maybe you want to see is there poison ivy here, what foes are in there, you know, versus just if you're going to go off the beaten path, you know your own background. But do you think, you know, it's more helpful, like I said, if you have people maybe trying to be transparent, authentic before you sit down and maybe present and say, this is my opinion, or this is where I got this from, or this isn't my original idea. Do you think that helps with the conversation and moving the ideas forward, or deciding, okay, let's scrap the idea and do something else?
I think we want to leave that open to each individual in each community. I don't want to police that at this abstract level of trying to explore the range of what we can understand and sort of define what the toolkit of a comprehensivist might be.
Thank you, CJ. So now are we ready to go to breakout rooms? I have put the questions in the chat.
Yeah, let me read the question.
Please.
And there are two questions. I do appreciate Shrikant put it in the chat. And then people can read along. Hopefully it's the same because I'm not looking at the chat. If anyone has any question about the questions, we could do one or two questions before we go to breakout, because we want to make sure everyone understands the questions. The first question is, does the classification of humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action into traditions of ideas, material culture, social structures, and experiences, does that circumscribe the ken of the comprehensivist? Does it circumscribe the range of what we can understand and know? And does the whole and its four categories delimit this range of our knowledge? That's sort of the first question. And the second question is, if you disagree or slightly disagree, you know, how would you encompass the inventory of approaches or traditions that we as explorers of everything might mobilize in our quest to comprehensively comprehend our worlds and its peoples? Does anyone have any questions about those questions? You're going to go into breakouts. You're going to explore these two questions with, what, 6 to 8 people. And if you have any questions now, or we can just go straight into breakout.
Okay, I want to also repeat what the format is. So CJ did a presentation. There was Q&A focused on clarifying what was said. Then we're going to go to breakout rooms to discuss that presentation with the help of those two really pointed questions. That'll be for about 25 minutes, after which we'll automatically come back into this room. Then CJ is going to do his second presentation. We will follow the same thing, clarificatory questions, followed by breakout rooms. Then we'll come back into this main room, and there, everybody will get to talk about their takeaways. Okay, and then we will do a discussion on that. So that's the format. So looks like there aren't, give me just a second. Looks like there aren't any questions. So I will start the breakout rooms with your permission. CJ.
Yes, go ahead.
All
yes.
Right. Starting them now. Okay, welcome back. So now we are going to do this whole process again. CJ is going to present the second part of his presentation, and we'll do clarificatory question and answers, breakout rooms, But after those second breakout rooms, we're going to come back and we're going to do takeaways. So everybody will be able to give their comments for 2 to 3 minutes on what they got from the presentations and the breakout rooms. All right, and then we will discuss that. All right, CJ, floor is yours. CJ, you need to unmute yourself.
When we left the breakout, we got muted. Very good. So we started the evening surveying the ken of the comprehensivists. That is the range of knowing that we might use to comprehensively comprehend our worlds and its peoples. Now, let's consider how we might explore this, our total inventory of humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action, including, if our categorization from the first section is useful, our traditions of ideas, traditions of material culture, traditions of social structure, and all humanity's experiences, all 8 billion of us. At first, it might seem impossible to explore. Its vastness is boggling. How are little finite human beings like me and you going to find our way in this immense, unmappable repository of all humanity's traditions? One strategy we might use would be to limit ourselves to assaying those traditions that purport to provide initiates with the means to grasp anything or even everything. These are the great traditions of universalism, and they include our many spiritual, mystical, and mythological traditions. It includes science and technology, Renaissance humanism, the liberal arts, transdisciplinarity, universology, consilience, holism, integral theory, world systems theory, cultural studies, semiotics, complexity, systemics, cybernetics, and synergetics, and probably many others. Personally, I've spent a lot of time exploring synergetics, science and technology, and the liberal arts, but I've also done limited forays into holism, cultural studies, complexity, systemics, cybernetics, semiotics, and integral theory. So clearly, I think these universalist traditions do have some merit. But I am wary that by prematurely fixing our minds on one or more universalist traditions, we might preclude an unbiased exploration of other traditions. So I believe that none of the universalist traditions is universally accepted, though their adherents may claim otherwise. Their assumptions, the assumptions of these universalist traditions, may be controversial. Maybe they should be controversial and aren't. They may require substantial time and effort to learn. So I would suggest that it might be better to dabble in several of them rather than focus too much on any one universalist tradition. That is, keeping our eye on the full inventory of all the great traditions of human inquiry and action. That, I feel, might better facilitate our comprehensivity. So how should an aspiring comprehensivist choose which tradition of inquiry and action to explore next, I would offer 5 recommendations. First, if you have a life mission, explore the full scope offered by the great traditions to see what might best contribute to broadening your perspective in your current situation. You can, I would claim you can splice in some comprehensivity even if your approach to life is already pretty firmly set. Secondly, if you have a current project or a current interest, explore it thoroughly. The book, The Design Way, asserts, quote, desire is the destabilizing trigger for transformational change, unquote. So follow your interests, follow your desires. Comprehensivity is built incrementally. Each project or interest that is comprehensively explored is a stepping stone on a life's mission for ever broadening comprehensivity, no matter how parochial each particular project may seem in isolation. My third recommendation is to explore some tradition that is way outside of your comfort zone. As a math, philosophy, science kind of guy, my comprehensivity was significantly advanced by studying Giuseppe Mazzotta's exquisite free online course from Yale Open Courses, Italian 310, Dante in Translation. Dante's magnum opus, which he called the Commedia, and later has been dubbed the Divine Comedy, is itself a mini course in comprehensivity. It's a journey through the medieval perspective on the liberal arts. Engaging epic poetry redressed a deficiency in my logico-deductive kind of mind and opened new horizons. But maybe you're someone who's good at poetry and spirituality, and you might achieve your comprehensivity breakthrough by studying engineering or mathematics, or by exploring what is furthest from your current skill set, furthest from your current proclivities. I believe you can most rapidly, most efficiently develop a broader comprehensivity. Fourth, if none of these whet your appetite, explore one of the universalist traditions. I'd recommend systemics, cultural studies, or synergetics as the most promising, but each of them offers some hope of universal applicability. Of course, I should note that as the executive director of the Synergetics Collaborative, my choice of synergetics is very biased. And fifth and lastly, if you are not drawn in any particular direction, choose your next effort to ratchet forward your comprehensivity at random. There are too many possibilities. There is no right answer. Whatever you work at thoroughly exploring will bring new magic into your understandings of our worlds and its peoples. Jump in and begin. So we're going to take questions now. Again, save your comments and takeaways for the end. If you have any question to clarify something that was vague or confusing? Is there something you're resisting? Are you blocked by anything about the practice? This segment is the practice of comprehensivity, exploring the great traditions. Any questions?
Okay, folks, again, the same rules. You can line up for questions by raising your hand or typing !mark in Zoom. Joe, you're first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about the second one. The idea that desire is the basis for transformational change. Does that mean all change is irrational?
That would be one interpretation. I'm not going to weigh in on that one.
Okay, next question is from David S. David, go ahead.
Right, I just typed it out. I'm wondering, among the traditions you mentioned, universalist traditions, conciliation and holism, do the great Western religions fit into this as being universalist disciplines?
Yes, my first one was the mystical and spiritual and mythological traditions.
Okay, any more questions? All right. Okay, next question is from Prithvi. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to ask, so like all universalist traditions begin by the approach of wanting to know. So my question is basically, what can we not know? And maybe that is a good starting point for like what to begin with. To begin with is, what do we not know, or what can we not know?
Yeah. If I knew that, I could have defined it more succinctly. It's everything that's not this that we can't know. I'm not sure we can know the answer to that one.
Okay, next up is Zeno, followed by Sandy. Zeno, go ahead. Zeno, you need to unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
So I would think that we would start with a tradition that embraces not knowing, not having the final answer, because it seems if we go on this journal of comprehensivism, we want to understand conflicting ideas, other solutions, other ways of living together. And we need to prepare ourselves doing that by kind of becoming open, being comfortable with uncertainty and not knowing. So I would add to your list of how we start, maybe by a practice of learning how to embrace uncertainty, not knowing, etc. But
I like that. I certainly think "Dare to be naive" is one of my favorite quotes from R. Buckminster Fuller. That gets at, you know, let's dare to be naive. Let's dare to admit our ignorance. But I would also say that all of us. I learned this in mathematics. In mathematics, to conduct any mathematical argument, you must begin with premises or assumptions. And I think that applies to all philosophy, all exploration. We have to begin with some metaphysical assumptions. Some traditions, such as the religious traditions, the spiritual traditions, often begin with faith. I know that Joe Bullock is looking at Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. And what's remarkable about that work is the emphasis that faith plays in some traditions. So certainly in the traditions I value, ignorance and dare to be naive is important. But as a comprehensivist, as someone who's really trying to understand all the world's peoples, I think we also need to understand how much of the world is run by metaphysical assumptions, by faith of various sorts. And there's a dynamic between not knowing and the complexity of not knowing and the faith that all of us have to have. We all have to have faith in some assumptions. Our language is one assumption that each culture with a language adopts, that these words are meaningful.
Thank you, CJ. Sorry to interrupt. Are you done?
No, I was trying to see if I could conclude that, and I think leaving it there is better.
Okay, excellent. Next up is Sandy, Wesley, Darren, Gretchen, and Sanjay. So Sandy, go ahead.
So CJ, I have a question about how you can implement becoming more, to be more comprehensive. And you mentioned a number of a couple of different paths. One is the universalism, various disciplines of universalism, which would seek to find common values, I presume, and to learn from the experiences of people across a broad range of fields or disciplines. But the other thing that you suggest is to become knowledgeable and experienced in fields different from your own. That I think you said if you're comfortable with poetry and philosophy, why not study math or engineering? I'm wondering if the advice to be specialized in multiple things is really equivalent to becoming more of a generalist, or do we risk simply being overly specialized in that many more details that we could spend our time learning?
I think there are so many ways to do it. Each one may have merit. At this point, I don't want to be prejudiced against any particular path. It could be that the next breakthrough is going to come from some parochial study, some specialized study, or it might come from an integrative study of some Sufi mysticism and particle physics. Who knows? So the reason I laid out all those different paths, knowing that they're somewhat contradictory, somewhat impossible for any one person to do, is I'm trying to suggest the breadth of possibilities for comprehensivity. And of course, each person's going to have to choose their own path. You're going to have to judge what you want to do. And I might take a different approach, and that's great.
Thank you, CJ. Next question is from Wesley. He asks, does comprehensivity mean we need to constantly break our paradigms?
For some, but I think we might need some dyed-in-the-wool conservatives too, that really take to a tradition and uphold it. And not just our Western traditions, but maybe the dreaming of the Australian Aborigines. I hope someone preserves and defends that tradition. Each, and some of us might be delve into the complexity and embrace the contradictions and paradoxes. One of the influential books I read was by William Byers, How Mathematicians Think. William Byers is a Zen Buddhist mathematician, and he argues that the biggest and best ideas in mathematics are inherently paradoxical, inherently contradictory, inherently ambiguous. Take the number 0. The number 0, it means nothing. But I write it down on the page, there's a symbol, I do all sorts of symbolic manipulations. If I mess up my symbolic manipulations, the instructor tells me you lost a 0 there. 0 is the nothing that is. If you misapply it, your math is wrong. But what does it represent? It represents nothing. How can nothing be represented? It's inherently a paradoxical idea, and it's one of the most powerful ideas in mathematics. So, can I leave it there, or did I?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Next up is Darren, Gretchen, Sanjay, and Angela. Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, CJ, I can't help but think that what you're talking about is something akin to what exists in the academy in art, and has for probably about 40 years now. And they call it interdisciplinary practice, and it basically breaks down all the material and technical boundaries that we're traditionally used to. And you begin with your own interests, which may be material, conceptual, social, or performative. And then you do research. And research takes you outside of your domain of knowledge. It takes you into the sciences, it takes you across the humanities, it takes you to go talk to people that you would not normally talk to. Why? To maybe learn something, to engage in a conversation that's gonna be uncomfortable, it's gonna be full of questions, you don't know what you're after. And so you're trying to abandon what you do know in order to encounter something that may inform your thinking, may generate new ideas. And yeah, and I guess I started to see this a little bit in other areas. So I wonder if interdisciplinary practice is something that just needs to kind of be accepted in all domains, in all these silos that we keep trying to break down, so that these conversations can be had, so that knowledge can be synthesized, and we can actually talk to each other and do what we're doing here. And I mentioned in our last, in our breakout, that perhaps what we're doing here is sort of, education 2.0, what we should be doing as human beings after our formative training and getting a basis of knowledge. And after we break out of the silo, then what do? You go and talk to people who share completely different perspectives and maybe coming from a completely different framework than what you're speaking, and that's where you begin.
Well, I really appreciate learning about interdisciplinary practice in the arts. I never studied in the arts. I do work with RISD on a design science symposium, and I've heard this kind of idea. I just, it's not one of the traditions I've delved into. And I'm grateful for learning about another one I should add to my list if I can get around to it. I think there are other traditions, such as the dreaming of the Australian Aborigines, science and technology, but I'm grateful to learn about interdisciplinary practice in the arts. Thank you.
Next up is Gretchen. Gretchen, go ahead.
CJ, did I hear you right when you were saying that, kind of we begin with an assumption? Was that accurate?
Yeah, I believe every human conversation, every human tradition involves some distinctions. Each distinction is a metaphysical assumption in my thinking.
I guess that's where I'm a little confused, because it seems like, you know, to me, it's like, okay, like if it was a scientific process, it would begin with a hypothesis, and then you do your testing, and then you come out with your final result. And for me, I guess that's where I'd have a difficulty, because it's like, let's say I want to learn about, let's say, synergy, and I have nothing basis. I don't have a hypothesis. I don't have pre-thought involved, and I just dive into a book and start reading. So I guess that's where I get stuck on, why must we have an assumption prior to actually, you know, delving into, you know, comprehensivism?
Yeah, so at minimum, the assumption is the language you're given. At minimum, the assumption is the rules your parents taught you. I think our lives are filled with assumptions, and if you spend too much time questioning your assumptions, you'll go crazy. You know, science still has not been able to prove that life is not a dream. There's no way to prove, there's no scientific experiment we can conduct that proves that I'm not dreaming right now. So one of the assumptions we all make is that this is not a dream and that this is real in some sense, right? And I also want to say that Stuart Firestein argues that hypotheses are not necessarily important in science. He recommends his graduate students jump right into experimentation. He says you learn more in the lab. The hypothesis can distort and distract your approach. So yes, we're often taught this caricature of science that it's about hypothesis, but there are scientists that actually argue that that's not the only way science is done.
Okay, let's take last two questions from Sanjay and whatever comment or question that Angela has, and then we'll go to breakout rooms. Sanjay, go ahead.
Yeah, first, I just wanted to make a comment about interdisciplinary view. I mean, that's really where I started with comprehensivism. And to me, it's not only interdisciplinary within the arts, it's interdisciplinary within all subjects. Also, just to clarify some of the questions that people had, I mean, to me, there's a inherent element that I don't think we've said yet, but I think what we're talking about is that we're looking for a more efficient method of learning and understanding and you know, integrating our knowledge. So I think efficiency is what we're really focusing on. There, as Gretchen said, there are many ways to do it, and a lot of the more primitive ways, you know, if you just randomly pick a book and start trying to learn from that random book, it won't be efficient. It'll take you a lot of time, and you'll have to pull many random books. Anyway, the main question I wanted to ask is this: that we in our breakout rooms, one person had, I don't know if it was difficulty or didn't want to accept this view of comprehensivism. So when I started thinking about this, I came up with two things that I think are important for someone to want to take this view. And one is that they need to be curious, or they need to want to know the answer to things. And second, they need to believe that they can figure things out. Either they can, or that we can broadly, you know, in general, figure things out. So CJ, what's your take on this? Why do you think this is difficult for some people? Is the possibility that, you know, you described around 20 different categories, strategies. Is that the reason, or what other reason would you say?
Okay, I want to agree with you that curiosity is important. I think that's inbred in all of us as children, instinctually almost. And this idea that believe we can know, that's one of the metaphysical assumptions. Maybe we should doubt that one. I don't know, but even if you doubt it, you have to know that you can't know that you believe. I don't know how to double negate that one. Okay. In general, Sanjay, I'm not sure. I haven't interviewed enough people. I wasn't in your breakout. What are the breaks and blocks of comprehensivity? I'm hoping we can learn that through our time here. I don't want to encompass that just yet. I think we should keep exploring. I do want to comment on efficiency. I did mention efficiency as one of the good approaches for doing something outside your comfort zone, exploring something outside your comfort zone. But I think sometimes we think too much of efficiency, especially in the West. And I would want to protect and support a comprehensivist who chooses to engage an inefficient approach. If that's your desire, if that's your judgment, I wanna open a big tent.
Next up is Angela. Angela, go ahead.
So I mostly have a comment, some of which I've typed, so I'll just sort of reiterate some of what I was saying. So what keeps coming up for me is that any system of inquiry or any type of knowing we try to do is all through this like limited hardware, right? And limited senses. There may be senses that exist that we don't even have on our hardware. And so, and also over the course of human history, there were many times where we thought we know the truth. And then later on, science proves something different. So I think it's really important, like I think Zeno was saying, is to understand that like we don't always know. And I shared in a breakout, that I've seen this graphic before. If you imagine a circle, there's like a sliver, and that's what you know. And then there's like a little bit of a bigger sliver. That's the stuff you know you don't know. And then the vast majority of this circle is stuff you don't even know you don't know. You know, there's just so much information in the universe. And plus, we all have our lenses. We all have our biases. We can't separate from those. And so it's really important to, okay, try to know. It feels comfortable to know, but be open. Take your own knowledge with a grain of salt. Be open to knowing that you could be wrong. And part of that, I think part of what should be in that toolkit of any comprehensivist then is instead of always coming from a place of knowing, is coming from a place of learning. Shrikant, you do that 7 days a week, don't you? So I'd also like to say a couple other things for that toolkit I think any comprehensivist would need is critical thinking. You know, just because something's called science or said by an expert doesn't mean it's accurate or correct. They could be wrong. So everybody should be a critical thinker. We need that for any democracy. And also being brave, having bravery in that toolkit so that if you do disagree, you could speak up and voice your opinion in a respectful way. We also talked about in our breakout room about how important it is to have empathy because I can only see the world from this lens. Everybody is in their own world in a way, right here. And so it's really important too to understand though that perspective is limited, but it's still important to have empathy and understand that other people's perspectives and views are also important. So empathy should be in that toolkit, and also just being resourceful. If you want to learn, if you want to understand the nature of reality in our universe, multiverse, whatever the heck we're in, be resourceful, dig deep, find tools and navigate through this ocean of life the best you can, and using tools in the toolkit, being resourceful is another important thing to do.
Angela, that was wonderful. I just wanted to let everybody know that Angela will be back on August 19th to talk about, and CJ and I will be interviewing her on her thesis, which is about polymaths in the 21st century. All right, CJ, go ahead.
I think we should leave it there and go to the breakout questions. I'm going to read the breakout questions, and if anyone is confused by them and needs to ask a question before we go into breakout, we can do that. but I'm hoping they're self-explanatory and we can go straight into breakout like the first time. The first question is, how should an aspiring comprehensivist decide which traditions of inquiry and action to explore next? How should we practice our comprehensivity? And the second question is, which of humanity's great traditions of inquiry and action do you want to explore next? Would you choose, what would you choose? I'm sorry, would you choose from the traditions of ideas, the traditions of material culture, social structures, some packaging of experiences? How would you choose your next deep and broad exploration, your next stepping stone toward greater comprehensivity? Are there any questions about those questions, or are you ready to explore that with a group of 6 to 8?
Folks, any questions? You can go ahead and type. All right, there are no questions. I'm just setting up, give me just a second. I'm setting up the breakout rooms.
Can you simplify those questions? Can I, no, they're big questions. Can we simplify them? How should an aspiring comprehensivist decide which traditions? You know, it's basically, okay, here's the simplification. What is your reaction to the presentation, the question and answer, and the subject of this second portion of our event? What is the practice of comprehensivity? Your thoughts on the practice of comprehensivity. There's one question.
Wonderful, folks. So we'll be doing breakout rooms for only 25 minutes. You'll get a 2-minute warning. Then we'll be back and you'll get to share, each person will get to share their own takeaways on both the presentations and both the breakout rooms. All right, so I'm starting the breakout rooms now. All right, folks, welcome back. Right, so now it's the time for takeaways. So I'm going to just call on people in the order in which I see them in Zoom. Let me see, where is CJ? I don't see CJ yet. Okay, maybe he will join again. Oh, there he is. Okay, there he is. All right. Welcome back, CJ.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Zoom seems to kick me out after 2 hours.
Okay, excellent. You're back. All right, folks. So now we're going to do takeaways. So I'm just going to call on people in the order in which I see them in Zoom. And you get to talk about what are you walking away with from this meetup. Okay, you can talk about, you're not trying to recount everything that happened in the breakout room. It's about what is your take? What are you walking away with? Okay, if you do not want to share your takeaways, you're welcome to type skip. Anybody who, you can just type a skip, or if I call upon you, if I don't notice it, then you can just, when I call upon you, you can just not unmute and go from there. But I invite you to share the takeaways so we know what you're getting out of it. I'm very curious. So we're going to start with George, Maxine, and Sandy. George, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself first.
First of all, I would have to compliment CJ because all of the contradictory ideas he came up with, he anticipated. Above all, I like the idea of the random approach. So
okay, thank you.
I like that a lot. But actually what I got most out of was the sessions and trying to listen to other people, what they had to say.
Yeah, that's a very common comment that we've gotten. The breakout rooms is where most of the action is, because everything else is kind of just set up to just create a context where there is a common topic that people can talk about. It is clearly laid out, and then the breakout room does most of the work. So it's going to be Maxine, Sandy, and Darren. Oh, Maxine wants to skip. Okay, Sandy, Darren, and Vanessa.
Okay. What I really like is the multiplicity of paths that are available for increasing comprehensivism. I like the idea of trying new things, new specialties, but also to look at the broader picture. It's to get stuck in knowing the things that we know are so much less important than the things that we don't know, and that's my challenge is to explore the things that I know the least, but that I'm interested in. And I'm not interested in everything, but I know so many things that I know the questions to start with, and that's the challenge is to go in multiple paths as I see it.
Thank you, Sandy. So next up is going to be Darren, Vanessa, and Shrikant.
So I kind of concluded that all of us being here are kind of enacting the technique of the comprehensivist. And so I think we're probably actively demonstrating it and we don't even realize it, because we're remaining open, we're taking a risk, we're venturing into areas that we're not familiar, and perhaps coming out with something useful.
Excellent. Thank you, Darren. That's great. Next up is Vanessa, Shrikant, and Maritza.
Okay, maybe if there's something I feel strongly about, maybe take the, like Sandy said, even unique, that maybe I'm completely wrong, and speaking to someone with an opposing point of view, and maybe having a dialogue or even an interview, nothing to publish or anything, but coming, maybe being from the get-go, okay, I'm curious to find out more, or maybe I'm going to challenge you and, convince me I'm wrong, or seeing the other side of you, and maybe something that even go out there realizing, okay, acting like the kindergartner, the one learning either for the first time or realizing, wait a minute, I've got this completely wrong. Let's just pretend I know nothing about it. And kind of take from the ignorance point of view, and even stuff that I be willing to put aside stuff that I've accepted as gospel.
Okay, I'm going to skip myself. I'll move towards the end. Next one is going to be Marisa, David, and Dave.
For me, my takeaways, something really resonated with me that CJ said, and it was to inquire without action is to daydream. And I think that is a really great sentence, and it's one that we should keep in mind. And I think that in the breakout sessions, when trying to figure out, what's the path forward on deciding how to go forth with your inquiry and action to be a more of a aspiring comprehensivist, I think that this sentence does a really good job of summing up everyone's thoughts.
Thank you. Next up is David, Dave, and Jeff.
Right. I agree with what Maritza just said. But going in order of my thoughts, CJ talked about deep diving as well as dabbling. So I want to thank CJ for permission to dabble, because I feel this commitment to deep dive, that I'm going to allow myself to dabble, yes. And the other thing is, came out of our discussion was confronting contradictions is a very, very productive way to challenge yourself and work on comprehensivism, it seems to us. And so I think it helps to maybe seek a partner to do that, so that you're in confrontation with other ideas, some deep knowledge confronting some deep knowledge. So I believe in the deep stuff. And the other thing was doing, because a lot of this, what we're talking about is inquiry. And as Maritza said, where's the action part? So do what you're not doing yet. That's kind of what I'm taking out of this, to balance inquiry with action. So I think about, I'm not totally inactive, but it is a spur. So thanks again, CJ.
Thanks, David. Next up is Dave, Jeff, and Angela.
Thanks very much, CJ. And I remembered back to my career, to a moment of humility, working on a group on a project, that if I started listening with an open mind, I could learn things from others. I didn't have all the answers myself.
Thank you, Dave. Next up is Jeff, Angela, and Darwin. Oh, sorry, Joel.
So we had a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, CJ, for setting it up. I guess I came away with a new respect for the possibility that I know some things that I didn't think that I do. I don't know some things that I thought that I did, and there are definitely things that I don't know whether I know them or not.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Angela, Joel, and Prithvi.
Some of my takeaways in no particular order. I like that CJ encouraged us to try something totally far away from anything we do now. Just try something really different or learn something really new. Also, the bit CJ said about like not being productive, you know, I feel like in our society, we're expected to constantly be productive, and it just sort of turns us into machines. Like, it's okay to be human and not be productive and just explore. And then Anne also said something in our breakout room about the importance of being an independent thinker that I really liked.
Thank you, Angela. Next up is Joel, Prithvi, and Sanjay.
Thank you very much, CJ. This was very precise, I thought, and for me, for the first time thinking about these concepts or considering them, I thought it gave an excellent framework to approach things. And in fact, many of the things, without knowing what I was doing, I have been doing that. And I just want to say, Jeff, you speak in doo-wop lyrics. We need music.
Thank you, Joel. Next up is Prithvi, Sanjay, and Gretchen.
Hey, yeah, so thanks, CJ, first of all. I just wanted to say that somebody had brought up efficiency as something that science strives towards. Sorry about the background noise also, but it's morning here. But yeah, so I mean, like, if you take science as a comprehensivist tradition, is there an alternative to efficiency? That's something that I will think about. Yeah.
Thank you, Prithvi. It's great to see people from India and Singapore join us. So you're always welcome. Even if it means morning noises, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Next up is Sanjay and Gretchen.
Yeah, so as far as a new approach, I think, and I mentioned this in the breakout room, and this is something I've been trying for a few months, especially during this pandemic situation, and that's to use the random strategy a little more. You know, even when there's a risk of failure of having a non-optimal strategy, you know, sometimes it gets you out of a rut or a situation where you're not coming up with solutions. The problem is finding a reliable random number generator. So some of you in the computer sciences or maths may find that curious humor.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanjay. So next up is Gretchen, Zeno, and Joe.
I was just kind of led down the path, actually initially from CJ about thinking of like dualistic thinking, like searching for, you know, the opposite of what we, you know, based on kind of subjects of if we're scientific, then look, you know, more at religious stuff or whatever, or artistic stuff. And then I realized that rather than, I think comprehensiveness would be kind of like a plurality rather than looking at, you know, it from a single point of view and not the opposite point of view, but learning everything in between, that there are all the the different the different stages in between everything. So like more of a pluralistic point of view.
Thank you, Gretchen. Next up is Zeno, Joe, and me.
Yeah, I was kind of left with a question about what is the drive to comprehensivism? What motivates it? And so I seem to see two poles here. One, you could say it's a love for reality, to comprehend it completely, like a view from nowhere, a God's-like view, a love for humanity, to understand all thought. On the other hand, seeing that to me, comprehensivism is an impossible endeavor. So I see also the fear of missing out, the missing something that somebody said. So I kind of waver between the love for totality and the fear of missing out.
Thank you, Zeno. Next up is Joe.
Thank you, CJ and Srikant, for putting this on. You know, some key takeaways. I'm not going to expand too much on what people had said already, but I look at one key critical part of becoming a comprehensivist is the role of courage and ethics, because you have to have the courage to actually challenge conventional wisdom. So I think that that's a really important part. I think it's also really critical to have a certain level of comfort with the unknown, and to get used to that. That's another thing, which speaks to the role of adaptability, and the risk to efficiency ratio, and understanding when to take risks and when not to, as incorporating as many frames of reference as possible. That will help you determine, when to take risks. And I think that that's another interesting way of actually approaching comprehensivism, as far as making a decision as to what to pursue and what not to pursue. So those are the main takeaways that I had. I had some frameworks from our initial group that I was in, but I'm not going to go into that now. But the excellent discussion, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. So my takeaways from, I'm going to start with the second presentation of CJ. So CJ had 5 ideas. So in terms of kind of pursuing your life and mission, I'm going to keep it aside. But I have an idea which actually integrates all 4 at once. And so that is, kind of pursuing your current project or interest, stepping out of your comfort zone, exploring different universalist traditions, and doing something random. And one solution to that, my favorite solution to that, is to be at the Comprehensivist Wednesdays here, okay? Because there is no better place. And I actually like that. I've been doing the meetups for 4 years, precisely for this reason, because what happens is that you have people, we are social beings. We are limited beings, and life is very large, and we know only a little bit of it. But if all the people that you're interacting with have the same kind of approach, that's a great way of doing all these 4 things at once. So for number 1, pursuing your current project and interest, at Comprehensive Wednesdays, you're always welcome to present anything that you have for 5 minutes. So we have this feature called lightning talks. So talk about whatever it is that you're exploring. When you talk about something, you get actually 10 times more than actually listening. So that's number 1. Number 2, out of your comfort zone. There are people from everywhere in the world with all kinds of background here. And they're going to come at problems and questions from all kinds of angles that you have not thought of. So in a span of just 2 hours per week, you're going to be faced with lots of things from all kinds of angles. Number 3, each of us are pursuing comprehensivism from very different angles. I love what CJ does, but his method is very different from mine. His mind is very different from mine, though we are trying to do the same thing. And there is so much to be learned by the differences. If you have a common goal, And the differences, there is differences in our methods, our kind of natural proclivities, our strengths and weaknesses. I think there is a lot to be gained from that. And of course, random. You're going to hear, just because of the fact that it's so many people coming at it from so many. So it's like one, it's in India, it's called Sabki Dawa Sanchar. That means one medicine for all ailments. So I think that this is one. So that's one thing I wanted to say about the second presentation. Now, for the first presentation, I want to do something which I do for all my meetups. It's called syntopical thinking. So I want to take these 4 ideas, 4 categories that CJ has, and I want to interpret it from another thinker. Like we've been looking at Louis Sullivan. We covered Louis Sullivan last time. I'm doing a follow-up on that on Sunday. So how would Louis Sullivan look at these? That ideas, material culture, social structures, and experiences. He has a very, so he says, look, what really matters is life. What you are really focused on is life. Life is much larger than your consciousness. Life is what you're focused on. So that is the foundation. I'm going to use visual terms because I'm very visual, and so is Louis Sullivan. So life is the foundation, is what you're focused on. Experience is something that is coming from life to your consciousness. And what he calls expression, or you can call it action, is what you are putting into life. So you are experiencing life and you are expressing yourself. So that is like, like breathing in, experience, and breathing out, experience. So those are the 2 processes. Now, if you look at the other 3, ideas, social structures, and material culture, these are the forms that we use to do this. Ideas are ways of seeing patterns in experience and use to guide your system of expression or guide to your actions. That's what ideas are. What social structures are structures that make possible experience with other people and acting with other people. So it allows for social experience and action. The material culture does the same thing at a material level. And all these are forms. One of the basic principles of Sullivan is that form follows function. Anytime you lose sight of life, and that you have to experience life and you have to express, if your ideas or social structures or material culture, which are forms, stop you from these functions, then you're dying to that extent. So that is his core point, that in order to live, for your ideas to be living, you need to be open to experience all the time from life. You cannot substitute your ideas. You cannot let your ideas stop experience, which is what happens to most people. You cannot let your social structures stop you from experiencing the reality of social interaction, the social life. Nor if you find that your social structures are stopping you from proper social expression, there is something wrong with the structures. You have to question them. The same thing with material things. You cannot replace them. They are tools. They're only tools for living, and they live or die, and you live and die by that. So that is how Louis Sullivan would look at it. So this is what I always try to do with these meetups: connect whatever idea that we are discussing with other ideas that we have been discussing, so we can go across that. CJ, what's your takeaway?
Oh, there are so many. But let's I want to end on the note of multiplicity. Sullivan, I've watched your Sullivan. I couldn't make it last week, but I watched the video. I really like Sullivan as another model for how the world works and how to think about these things. But I want to leave with the idea that there are many such models. Each of them is a tradition. Each tradition, whether it's Australian Aborigine dreaming or Aunt Bertha's philosophy on life, or, you know, or the homeless bum you talked to last Thursday. Every experience has within it the possibility of magic as it engages a broader comprehensivity, the seeing of a new perspective, the engaging of new ways of thinking. And comprehensivity, to my mind, encourages and invites us to be more conscious about how we do it. There are so many ways to do it. And what I hope people walk away with is a value of their way of doing it, and then a nudge to try some other ways and enrich and magicise. How do you make more magical your approach? And we will continue doing this in our events. I did hear Zeno in particular with the challenge of love for totality and fear of missing out. My next presentation in 2 weeks is going to go in depth on the necessities and impossibilities. There are impossibilities about comprehensivity, and I you know, Buckminster Fuller didn't talk about them, but I will in 2 weeks.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you very much, everybody. I mean, you guys make all of this just so amazing. And both CJ and I really appreciate you being here and, you know, adding your thoughts and your enthusiasm for what we are doing. So thank you again, and thank you, CJ.
And Sanjay's going to sing us out, right?
Good night, everybody.